See, that's the only thing you said that makes sense.
No.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are IRENCAST. I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
This is Raj.
On the first and third Tuesday of every month,
We bring to you our perspectives
On theology and culture.
From a post-evangelical lens.
Thank you for joining us for another conversation to provoke your progressive Christian imagination. This week, we are going to start a series of episodes. We're not sure what we're going to call it. Maybe by the next episode, we'll have a clever, witty name for it. But for now, we're going to be talking about our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with what we're going to call our given community. So that would include family, that would include our society that we are born into. And then we're going to close out by talking about our chosen community, the friends, the relationships that we choose and we engage in on our own volition. And for our segment, we are going to be doing Desert Island. It's one of my favorites, and it should be very revealing about all of us, hopefully. Otherwise, it won't be fun, right? Right. Let's get into it. So let's talk about self, right? So we're talking about our relationship with ourselves, how we deal with ourselves, how we view ourselves. And it's a broad topic, but I think that the nice thing about it is that there's 5 selves in this virtual room, and we can all bring our self to the table and hopefully strike a chord with our listeners who would relate to either one of us or all of us or whatever. I think for me, to kind of get the ball rolling, a lot of times when self came up in my old evangelical context, it was always a negative thing. And we've talked about this several times before. It was always in the sense of, you are nothing without God, total depravity, all that bull crap that we all heard growing up in our evangelical circles. And then as a progressive, I find that it centers more around self-care, right? You are special. You are wonderful. Do these things to take care of yourselves. Psychologically, emotionally, go do your yoga on the beach kind of deal. And I think that those two things, they're jarring. And one thing that I've learned, and you could probably notice, at least for me, in the way that I've talked over the last year or more on this show, is that part of self-care or part of relationship with self for me has been acknowledging and wrestling, and I think this is especially appropriate in our culture today, acknowledging and wrestling with where and who I am in the society that I'm in. And obviously we'll get into this bigger as we go through in terms of like our society and family and all that dynamic. But, as a straight white male, I need to, if I want to be a whole self, acknowledge all the things that come with that. Because I think the whole self-care thing can at times become more of an isolation thing. Like, you take yourself out from everything, and it puts you more in a bubble. Not to say that self-care is important, and I think we're going to talk about that because it's all been important for all of us to move away from those things. But I think it's a balance of those things, being realistic about who we are internally and then how we fit externally in the world around us.
I think self-care is a mechanism to make people feel guilty for failing. Like, this is the critical millennial in me coming out, but we're told all the time, like, self-care in an environment where people are not being paid enough to take care of themselves, and they have very unique stressors, and telling them self-care is the most critical thing is subtly a way to shift blame. I think it is important, and I'm not saying that we should just lean into the idea that we're powerless to control our lives, but I still think that, like, society-wide, and especially as a pastor, right? Hey, self-care. Well, it's not just about self-care. Like, what kind of relationship are you in work-wise with your church you're working for? It's a little dark turn, but I think it's more than just isolation.
I think you're really onto something, Alan, because I think that it's a propensity within our culture to think of ourselves as actually separate from all these systems that we're connected to instead of a part of. And so self-care reinforces that idea that we're like separate and that we actually can, like you said, control how resilient we are, how many stressors we can handle and so on, without considering the way that our relationship to all the systems that we're a part of impacts who we are. So it's like you can't do self-care without doing system care.
And I think that's what Jeff was getting at,
Right.
saying self-care being an isolation thing.
But not as eloquently put as that just now, Bonnie. I really enjoyed that. I like that, set apart as opposed to being apart. I like that.
So those are like progressive problems, right? You were just talking about your former context and your current one. That seems like more of like a progressive community thing.
I don't know. I think maybe like the way that Bonnie worded it, it's very similar to you're in the world but not of the world. Like I think that dynamic of where your placement is, or that struggle is still the same on both ends of it. I think the manifestation of it is different, right? For like an older context, the manifestation is to try to isolate yourself and submit to some sort of whatever, which still takes away a certain amount of agency. And I think that, self-care does the same thing too, especially if you're thinking in terms of, setting yourself apart from the systems that you are a part of. It isolates you. It prevents you from fully engaging in a way that I think is similar to, again, this is if we're looking at it as a binary, right? If you're all self-care, I'm not saying self-care I don't think any of us are saying self-care is a bad thing. We should be taking care of ourselves. But we also have to acknowledge that our place in the world determines how much more we can indulge in that self-care, whether it's through therapy or a vacation or a day off from work, which a lot of people, you can't just take a day off from work and do that. And I don't know, what do you think? Like that kind of that dichotomy, it's different on the surface, but maybe it's the same if you go in any extreme, it's the same underneath it.
I think that you have to know yourself before you can actually tap into self-care in a real and legitimate way.
Well said.
I know for a long time, people would say to me, Casey, what do you do to take care of yourself? How do you what are the things that give you life? And I didn't know, right? I would just say the things that, I went for a walk today, the things that supposedly are supposed to give you self-care.
Prayer and reading the Bible.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and on both sides, right? So, in order to recoup as an evangelical, you take, how's your quiet time going? Right? Barf. Just saying that makes me want to puke. But are you getting that time every day with the Lord? Blah, blah, blah. And on the other side, the question is, well, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Are you working out? Are you eating healthy? Are you getting enough sleep? And I think that in a lot of ways, the self is a double-edged sword. You are a self and you are not a self. The stories you tell yourself about who you are may not actually be the things that are true about you. And so it really is a task to dig deeper than the ego message of who you say you are to find the things that actually bring you life. For example, I would have never thought that I was someone who enjoyed the outdoors as much as I do now. But when you lose 200 pounds and are able to do those things, myself said I was never one of those people. And now I can't wait for to go kayaking. I found myself the other day out pulling weeds by myself and just basking in that. But that took work. And so I think that that's one of the things that we as people have to begin to unravel, is we are a self and we are not a self. And where do we find delight in both of those things?
You said self-knowledge is important, is key before taking care of yourself. You have to know how to and who you are. I kind of want to know what the Seventh-day Adventists were like, but in my context, there was not a high price on knowing yourself at all. Like, you were supposed to conform. You weren't supposed to dig into your intrinsic motivations and identity.
Well, because then you were being
sinful.
Selfish. Yeah, selfish
Right.
And sinful.
It was actually evil to get to know yourself to some extent. I mean, that was preached from the pulpit in my background.
Yeah, I think self-knowledge is such a pervasive problem. I don't think it matters where you come from.
For sure.
It's this great mystery. I mean, this grand mystery. Kind of Casey was talking about being asked about, well, how do you take care of yourself? Yeah, yesterday in my therapy session, that's what my therapist asked me. She was like, so how do you practice self-care? I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I have no idea what that actually is. And I think what I was really meaning, and, obviously we're going to explore this more, is like the notion of self is such a grand mystery.
That's right.
And it's a deep thing. And, Alan, you were talking about Seventh-day Adventists. Yeah, it's fundamentalist, sectarian. It's not about you. It's about all this other stuff. The first time I ever heard the idea that, from a Christian perspective, that the self was important was attending kind of in a return to Christianity. Was at Glide United Methodist Church in San Francisco, and Reverend Fitch was like, the Bible says to love your neighbor as yourself. And he's like, if you don't love yourself first, you're no good to anybody else. And then he went on to talk about what does self-love look like, and how do you, and I was just like, what? It's actually a thing. And, Glide is a very, they serve the homeless in very tangible ways. They serve the queer community in very tangible ways. So they've been on loving people on the margins is their thing. And to actually come to realize I myself as an entity have been a thing on the margins too. I don't even know what that is. So it was pretty mind blowing. And to actually still be in this work of, well, what is self 10, 12 years later it's remarkable.
Yeah. When I think about the old ways of thinking about self in the fundamentalist Seventh-day Adventist tradition that I grew up in, I think, Jeff, what you said about like maybe that's something that hasn't been really deconstructed in the evolution from fundamentalism to progressive Christianity is this notion of self. That it's like two sides of the same coin, this like narcissistic, egoist behavior, and also this giving up all the glory to God all the time, like the self-effacement. That's
right, Bonnie.
That there's some sort of like arrogance that can come in this like give up, it's not me, it's God. It's not me, it's God. And to say that again and again and again is kind of a narcissism. And I don't know what any of you think about that, but that's been my experience as I
100% agree.
Humble bragging is like a rite of passage in those churches.
I will say that pride and self-hatred are not mutually exclusive. Like you can have this like narcissistic pride and also hate yourself at the same time. I think it was Groucho Marx who made the joke way back in the day that he would never deign or lower himself to join a club that would accept him. Like that's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek joke, but it's true. I mean, Raj mentioned this being a grand mystery. It is for everyone, for every religion, for every human being. Knowing yourself is a type of intelligence that people, they've identified in the 80s. I keep bringing this up in all these episodes, but I think it's just fascinating. The different areas of intelligence. There's body intelligence. Some people are very kinesthetically, like they're just so connected to their body. There is an intelligence there. There's naturalist intelligence, like connection to the world, musical, and then interpersonal and intrapersonal. There are people who like you have friends who just know what you're thinking all the time, right? And they can just see you. They know what you're feeling. They know what you need, but they may not know themselves at all. That intrapersonal intelligence, knowing yourself, is this mysterious, wonderful exploration. And the sick irony is the person at Glide was right. If you don't love yourself, if you have that mixture of self-hatred and perhaps that narcissistic pride, you won't let other people love you. Like, if someone starts to love you back, you're going to be like, well, that person's not that great because they love me, like how your view of other people, if your view of yourself is that you are constantly this evil creature who is not worthy or deserving of love, when other people start to love you, you are going to devalue them. That's what that gospel that Jesus speaks, love others as you love yourself, speaks to, is undoing that cycle.
And I think we're seeing that all over the world is because we actually have so much self-hatred. We have these repeated mass shootings and so on. So we are, quote unquote, loving each other as we love ourselves, which is pretty jacked up right now. And
Definitely.
Maybe always has been.
I guess I'm not convinced that at the heart of it is self-hatred. Like, I think that for some people it is self-hatred, but I don't know. Maybe
I'm just speaking for personal experience. I'm not saying everyone is like that.
Right. Well, but I do think it's a motivation for people. I do think that our view of the self does, which is why it's hard to judge actions, right? Because below the surface is that I think we can judge actions as it doesn't matter what your motivation is in terms of the consequences of those actions. They're still going to hurt people or help people. So from an outside perspective, who gives a crap about your motivations? But on an internal perspective, it certainly matters because it's a part and a definition of who you are as a self. And it can affect the way that things come out later. And I think that, Alan, you were talking about how self-hate and a certain arrogance or pride aren't exclusion, like they don't have to be exclusive from one another. And I agree. But I also think that at times that they are very much. I think sometimes that kind of arrogance is an excuse for hatred of others.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Jeff. I think crediting hatred on the surface as being the source is a mistake, because hatred is a result of, I think, ultimately untended grief. And when we have untended, unresolved grief, it manifests in really troubling ways. And sometimes we damage ourselves, and sometimes, depending on our personalities, we end up damaging other people.
So that's one of the ideas in terms of the Enneagram. Like, the way you became your number was out of trauma from childhood. Like, you are your number because you had to survive something pretty difficult. It was the survival skills that you learned as a child that you have just manifested over and over and over again. It's a lens in which you see the world. It's the lens in which, or it is the way in which you navigate the world, because it is what has kept you the most safe.
I love that Enneagram doesn't shame you for that. Like, because it's impossible to not have survival skills. We all learn that, right? That's what it means to be a human. We've mentioned before, wired for survival, worthy of love. But Casey, when I hear you talk about the Enneagram, it's not that this is a negative thing, but it's something that you can understand and understand how it might trip you up, or how you can live out of it in a life-giving way.
Right. So, right. And I think that that's sort of what I was getting at earlier. It's like, some of the ways in which have always seemed to work for me in terms of how I find life, or the way in which self-care works for me, aren't always actually the ways that are best for me. Because I have told myself a story about who I am and what I love, and to find out that those things were actually not as life-giving as I had expected them to be. And that's where I think self-discovery is so important, and why I would challenge any of you and any listener to continue to try new things, to risk and to experiment. We credit children for wondering, right? And encourage that. Like, try new sports, try different, dance classes. We encourage children to wonder and to explore, and somehow along the way, we lose that in ourselves. I believe that does us more harm than good, I guess. And
it's kind of passé to talk about, your inner child, but I really do think that we carry those parts of ourselves, that grief that is primordial, that is from childhood, we've carried with us, but we're still in there. Like, we're an amalgamation of all of the identities we've been from the time that we've been born. And I remember a couple years ago walking by a river and just thinking about my life and about me as a little kid. And I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh, bless his memory. He was talking about talking to your inner child or your younger self. And I envisioned myself in 5th or 6th grade. I'm this overweight little kid who's getting made fun of by all these people at school, who hates himself, who's really excited and always asking questions in class and pissing everyone off, like teachers and everyone else, just because I have all this energy. And I was like, that kid was cool. That kid was really cool. I would love to hang out with the younger version of myself. And I just imagine taking my own hand and walking with me, and giving myself the love that I may or may not have received from teachers or friends or from the people around me. And I think any of us can do that. It sounds cheesy, but really going back to those places in your life where you didn't receive love does resolve some of that hatred. Because I think Raj is right. It is, hatred or anger and hatred is this thin veneer over grief, over things that we didn't get. One thing for listeners who are listening, though, like I've heard people talk about when they had emotions, their parents would say demons were affecting them. Like there's trauma, there's religious trauma that's real in regard to our relationship with ourselves. So if you grew up and your parent was being, your parent used your religious situation to like not listen to you, not give you love, you can't go back and relive the past. You can't go to your parents and get the love that you desire, or especially from a romantic partner, right? That's like, this is something that I've been really like digging through personally. That's why I'm getting a little excited, but it's unfair to look at your romantic partner and expect them to give you the love of a parent, because they're not your parent, and you're not 12 years old. You're not 6 years old. You're not 4 years old anymore. Nobody can give you that kind of love, but you can. You can give that to yourself. You can do some of the work of healing some of that grief.
I think what I from listening to everyone share, like self-hatred, Enneagram, this idea of how do we heal ourselves from the wounds and trauma of our childhood. I think that's why I really like where the Enneagram and family systems theory sort of come together. Enneagram, we're all given a number, and we can sort of think of that as like we have an essence. And yet I'm not sure that self is ever essential. That, as like Casey, as you were describing, like these things that you thought cared for yourself, and now you're in a different place, and now there's whole new things that care for yourself. So are we self, or are we part of a system? What's that balance between individuality and togetherness? And how is self involved in its own process? Which means that if we talk about things like transformation, which is, a theological term, it's a biological term, it's a term that's used all over the place, then what does transformation mean? Does it mean actually becoming something new and different? And if so, can we embrace that? Or do we need to continually hold on to the self in an essential sense? Or is it evolutionary?
I love the idea of letting go of the self, because it's when you let go of the self that you begin to find how connected to everything you actually are. The more exploring that you do of that, aside from that story that you tell yourself, the wondering that happens and the mystery that comes in the face of nothingness allows you to also find that in another. And I think that that's something that, as in the last year that I've been navigating, is when I'm walking with Cole, my dog, and taking a moment to just be in that space and be grounded in the earth, and to not tell myself any story about what's happening, but to just be. Things pop up in the wake of the silence that I'm trying to create. And it allows for me to say, I didn't know this about myself, or I didn't recognize that tree before, because we're always individually telling ourselves stories about every moment of the day, everything that's happening around us. We are illustrating in our brains everything. And what happens when you can set all of that aside and just be fully present? And I think that when you come back into that, what it does is it creates space for you to do that for another. We talk about this all the time. Be present. Be present. Mm-hmm. But what does that really mean? It means shutting off the messages that you're telling yourself about what's actually happening in front of you, and just be in the space.
Right. And I think that along with that is that we don't know how to be in the space of us, like our own, who we are. Exactly. And I wonder if part of the problem is that we think so much in terms of destination, right? So even when Bonnie says like we are becoming, I think the impression that most people have in the back of their mind is that there's a destination. So we're on our way to something instead of being reality,
That's right?
Right?
That's right. Yes.
Moving ourselves forward and knowing that we're always going to change. Like I remember growing up, my grandma used to say like whenever someone got mad, they'd be like, "Oh, that's that Irish temper." Like they'd always assume like these are things about yourself that you were born with that will never be gone. And I think that that's the danger of the Enneagram. Although Casey, you'd be proud. I've been immersing myself in the Enneagram. I've read 3 books in the last 2.5 weeks on the Enneagram to kind of to engage in that. Anyway, but like the danger of that is, well, I'm a 2. And then you stay there. So you've created and rested in a new reality of who yourself is. And I think that's dangerous, because I think in any endeavor, the more you explore, the more you expand, the more you understand. We did it with our relationship with God, right? All of us did. We moved from evangelical fundamentalist to something else because we allowed ourselves to explore. And we don't allow ourselves to explore ourselves in all ways, right? Like internally, and Alan's talking about body intelligence, right? Like being able to explore who we are, not just sexually, but even like new activities, like pushing.
But that is important also.
It is also important, very much important. So I think that all of those things, like Alan was saying, that there's so many layers in which we can expand our intelligence. And I think that really, what are we doing when we expand our intelligence? We're expanding more ways in which we can view ourselves and the world around us, whether that's through our body or through our mind or through any of that kind of stuff. And I think that we just becoming is important. So I think
and
that
you're not arriving anywhere.
Right? Exactly.
I mean, I love, and that's what I was saying earlier about curiosity, finding that curious self again, returning to the wonder of who you are allows you to turn that outward and to begin to wonder and be curious about those around you.
Every moment is an arrival and also a launching point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that all of this is fantastic, and I don't want to derail the conversation, but I'm just thinking about where I've been and what I've come from. Listening to this episode, people would be like, they can't even start to think along that path, because we've been given messages like, the heart is deceptively wicked, who could know it? So if you're just getting to know yourself more, you're just increasing your ability to do evil,
Luther says there's nothing good in you but Christ, and that makes you good enough.
That's because he was an ass, and that's how he
what I'm trying to say is that there's things that need to be addressed, I think, in this episode before we just move in a direction that I think all this is very helpful, but I'm just thinking there are still people who are deconstructing their ideas of self in like the conservative fundamentalistic context. And I think it's kind of important to maybe answer some of those things. Like if you right now asked people, are humans basically good or bad? People who grew up evangelical are given this thing that no, humans are basically evil. Like that's at least from my neo-Calvinistic background. And so all of this talk sounds like whimsy, it sounds like irrelevant and inappropriate and all of those things. And the sad thing is, like, this is where all the good work happens. And so there has to be like a reframing in my mind to give yourself permission to let go of some of the unhelpful things. Like you're born sinful and deserving of hell the moment you're born as a baby, because you are inherently evil and God hates you. And thank God that God is merciful enough to kill Jesus so that you don't go to hell. Like those kind of concepts teach us that getting to know yourself is wrong. And I think you have to replace some of those messages, or reclaim some of those messages, and you can, using Christianity if you want to. I mean, we're all made in the image of God, right? Like that's an element of Christian thought for a long time, the Imago Dei. And if you
actually Jewish.
Okay, Jewish and Christian. I'm thinking of like the medieval Latin Christian scholars who talked about that all the time. But you're right, it goes much further past Christianity. But the idea that getting to know yourself well is getting to know God. Like there's like the image that you are made in is a holy and good thing, not that there's a place that you're necessarily going to be arriving at. I like that. I think Casey said that, but just knowing who you are is, if we don't know ourselves and we're not fully able to be who we are, then we're missing out on that bigger picture.
There is a book called Original Blessing, Putting Sin in Its Rightful Place by Danielle Schroyer. And I remember a few years ago being at a progressive youth ministry conference and hearing her talk about Jewish understanding of Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. and talking about original blessing versus original sin, her comment was, if there's any problem we have at the beginning, not that she believed in a 7-day creation, but of this story, if there's any real problem, the problem is that we have a blessing problem. We don't realize how loved we actually are. And walks through Genesis 1, 2, and 3 as a way of saying, this is about raising children. God gives them responsibility, just like we give children responsibility. God allows them to name the animals of the earth, just like we encourage children to name pets. And then I remember as a little person, for the first time recognizing my nakedness. We all have stories of like our nieces or nephews or children. You open the door and they're like, "I'm naked." And it's sort of like, who told you that? What's going on? And then God sends them, and then they fall in love, whatever. All of these first human experiences, and then God says, it's time for you to move out of the nest, right? It's time for you to move on. And as this Daniela lady is telling the story, I'm like sobbing in the back because I had never heard the story told this way. And I think that, Alan, I think you're right in saying we have to address some of those earliest stories that were told about who we are as people from a pulpit. During Lent, I've been doing this thing with my congregation where we are telling stories. And last week we started with Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and I laid out the case just like I was talking to you guys about. But the lady who shared in my church talked about her mom always telling her, you're a cold-hearted person. You have no emotions. You don't feel. And it was only until she was in her 30s that she was able to say, that's a story told about me. It is not true of who I am. And I think it's the same as we come to, like you're saying, Alan, we have to confront these stories again to say, these are stories that have, these messages that have been shared with us are not true. They're not true of who we are as creatures. They are not true of who we are in relationship to the divine.
The story of Babel did that for me too. You're talking about rereading Genesis, like Babel being a punishment, or is Babel being like, no, move out of the nest, like you said, and go explore your different cultures instead of creating this monolithic culture where everybody is the same. God is actually making humanity fulfill the earlier commandment to go throughout the whole earth and to be fruitful and multiply and to change and have different languages and have this diversity where, those are all these different human expressions come from that. To me, that's more of a blessing than it is a curse. So I think rereading that stuff is great.
Yeah, the notion of changing one's narrative is very powerful. And it's hard work. One of the spaces where that's actually been studied with legitimate data to back it up is around first generation college attendance. And a friend of mine runs a program particularly for first college generation attenders and minorities. And a big part of her work in supporting these students is how do you rewrite your narrative? And the statistical difference between college retention, like young people actually staying and finishing college that have had programs and interventions like that to support them versus first generation and minority students who don't have those programs is staggering. The difference is staggering. So being able to claim your story as your own, delete chapters or relegate chapters that other people have thrust upon you into, some other section of the library, your personal library is really powerful. But it's hard work. And, again, tying into, yes, it's about self, but you got to do that work in community. You need people to help support you. And in some cases, trusted, capable mentors to help guide the process for you as you're able to develop your own footing. That's one setting where we can say it works.
I think that's good that you brought that up. And if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to kind of shift into maybe another aspect that we mentioned in the beginning, is that talking about that society, that story that is being thrust upon you, is that part of that reality of self is recognizing what what heritage you come from. Like, what story are you a part of just by birth? And I know we'll get into that. We'll get into like the systems of that when we talk about our given community. But I think that we do, while we're talking about self, address like, how do we as an individual reconcile ourselves to that? Do we blind ourselves to our heritage and deny it and just live as though we're not affected by it, even though we are on a daily basis, which I think is probably more of a tendency. It took me 35 years to even begin to deconstruct my privilege, my place, my story in society as an individual. And it's been hard work. And I think that that's another thing to look at as we kind of, finish the conversation on self.
Much like the ego messages that have sustained us for ill, for good and for ill, I think it's the same idea, Jeff. I mean, this is what we see perpetuating in our political system now, right? The protection of whiteness, the protection of masculinity, the protection of straightness, all of the ego messages, societal ego messages around safety and protection. They're toxic and they're unhelpful.
But making those changes is really hard. And so what ends up happening often is that it gets shifted into new language, but it's exactly the same substance. Just new language shrouds it or covers it over. I think it's really important and helpful to never think of oneself as coming into the world as a blank slate, that we bring into the world all of our inheritances, and emotionally, genetically, socially, all of these things come into the world with us, and then they're given to us to work with, but work with in relationship to all the other connections that we have, because to be human is to be in relationship. There's no getting around that. So as much as we want to talk about self, self is differentiated only as much as we as the boundaries that we begin to set as we learn more about how to be healthy and to take care of ourselves. But it's always in relationship. So I wonder, like, if we change the way we think of selves as kind of entities separate from, and all of these different entities are connected, but instead focus on what is the space between? What is the space between, and how can we use language to describe that?
That's dangerous.
Tell me how that's dangerous.
That's dangerous to concepts like meritocracy. There are people who make tons of money fighting that idea.
Oh, yeah.
Like the idea that you're born a blank slate and you've worked hard for everything you have, like that props up the kind of capitalistic, laissez-faire meritocracy thing that you have to earn everything that you get, and you have earned everything that you have. And if we focus as people on that space between us, it unravels a little bit of that narrative. And so there are
the whole narrative.
Right. There are people who are invested in not exploring that.
Well, it makes you wonder, is there such a thing as private ownership?
Right.
And everything that comes unraveled when you start wondering that.
Oh, at least in the United States it does.
Just from this conversation alone, I've already written down like 5 episode ideas. I feel like we've got a lot going on.
Raj, you've been awfully quiet today. I'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah, I guess there's so much gray, in this subject matter, and we desperately don't want there to be. We want to have some sense of self. So I'm listening, I'm thinking and reflecting in this. I thought I had more to offer before we started recording, and. Yeah, I wonder. I mean, but, kind of stepping back into the abstract and into the conceptual realm, but the idea of meritocracy and its relationship to Dr. King's idea of the content of one's character. And I wonder if maybe working towards a place where the things that we achieve, so to speak, the things that we attain in one's life are to be the basis of whatever we reap. I don't know that that's entirely a bad construct to pursue. The way it is now, it's not a meritocracy. It's weighted. Certain people have ridiculous obstacles put in front of them, and other people have a glaring head start, and they have a support van along the way with refreshments and
people paying off their college administrators to
all
get
that,
into college,
all of
all
the
the
above,
way up to a CEO of a company.
So we don't really have a system right now where real meritocracy exists.
Right. It's a fallacy. It's like a lie. It's a sham.
Absolutely, currently. But I wonder if we were to have a society where that were truly fair and just, and then giving us the chance to actually go, anything's possible. Given societally, I mean, I think we all have limitations as individuals, but lots of stuff is possible.
I think that people are too cynical for that, though. Like,
because we've conditioned to be, right?
I think
that
scarcity
so and
everyone is scared of automation. That companies are going to replace us with robots, right? They're only scared of that because we can only take care of ourselves through earning healthcare, through earning like the ability to live through our jobs. And we're scared. We're scared that there's going to be no jobs for people left 20 years from now. And that's only because our society doesn't take care of each other. We could automate everything. We could give people a basic income. We could take care of one another, human beings, and then free each other up to like do the good stuff that like we can do as human beings.
Wonder.
But I think people are too cynical. At least the system we're built on. Yeah, but if human beings are basically evil, you don't want to free them up. You don't want to free them up from the hard labor of what we do right now because, they're going to do bad stuff. I think we don't believe enough in ourselves as people that if we did take care of each other and our basic needs were met, we could do really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I don't think people are basically evil. I think we're basically
absolutely not
good.
But there's a lot of people in America that would say that they are. I mean,
well, and then maybe we send those people to an island by themselves.
There's a
so in line with the heart of what we're talking about. That would be good.
That's kind of a joke there, sort of.
I know.
But I think greed is a thing, is an evil that we've got to overcome. It's a collective and shared evil.
That's right.
However, that's rooted in fear and a sense of scarcity and those kinds of things.
Yeah, we spent $180 billion a year since 9/11 fighting the war on terror, like specifically fighting terror. What if we poured all of that money? Can you imagine $180 billion being poured into infrastructure, education, programs of social uplift?
Healthcare.
For this many years? For like 18 straight
Housing.
years? That'd be incredible. I mean, what could we do?
Not to be technical, but if there's no threat, then we're not going to overextend ourselves. So that like half of that, we wouldn't be going into debt. We'd stick with our budget if it was just for good things, right? Like we wouldn't put ourselves in a negative financial space just to take care of people, only to take care of people. Like, and I put quotes up like take care being, protect. Anyway, that's side note. Sorry. I just
that's a good point.
As long as we continue to stay in survival mode, we prevent breakthroughs in getting into this new thing. And so
personally too, right?
Yeah,
right,
absolutely. Yeah. So even if you throw a lot of money at something, unless you're throwing money at the thing that's going to actually help folks to see differently, it'll just keep self-perpetuating.
Coming back to this conversation with the self, I believe that there are two kinds of people. There are people that live on one side of this coin that would say, I matter. And that's the scarcity that they come from, longing to matter to someone. And so they are going to boast about themselves. They are going to push themselves into conversations. They're going to be aggressive in terms of the way they come into the world to draw people to them, which ultimately, what does it do? Pushes people away. And then there are people who live on the other side who say, I don't matter, who are almost fearful in seeing themselves as anything other than someone who does not matter. And that's, again, a scarcity thing. I think that as we're talking, it's coming to a place of acknowledging that we do matter, but how do I say that without
but that others matter equally, right? Like if we are the only one that matters and we don't have a view that other people matter as much, then that's where we run into the problem. And I think that's kind of the perfect segue into, as we finish out this series, is that we're right. Like relationship is the most important, which is why self is only 1/3 of this ongoing conversation that we're going to have, is because, and, we'll obviously address it, but it's really, I think maybe the most toxic view of self is that you're isolated, whatever that is. Like that's the absolute worst you can view yourself, is that you're above or even below anyone else, like that you have equal value. And not to get too complimentarian, but you have different things that make you unique, but uniqueness is not a hierarchy. Right? Like you can have an even plane. Everyone's unique. And I think that's where we get into trouble. So maybe that's kind of that landing point for us in this conversation, is that you are special, but so is your neighbor and your friend and your weirdo cousin. I don't know.
I don't want to get preachy, but that sounds like Jesus. Human trappings are for humans, right? Not for God.
It was about Jesus with you, Alan.
God's not like, ooh, look at you. You've got your company. Wow, you're an important person, right? No, human beings all together are loved and worthy of respect, regardless of station. I think that's an old message and a good one.
And your questions are valuable. Like, we talked earlier about narrative. The way narratives are changed are because we follow questions that we have, maybe that even live in our bodies. And, we experience them as anxiety or as yearning. And so for folks who might be wondering, like, it might be feeling really confused because they've gotten this message from their community for so long, but it just doesn't sit right anymore. It doesn't feel right anymore. Then I would say that part of what we're trying to communicate today is it's okay to trust yourself, to trust that you're being lured into maybe a different path, a different narrative, and to just follow that and see where it might lead, and to continue to stay connected to oneself along the way, and see what new things might be on the horizon.
Agency is where it's at. I mean, I want to be a part of communities that build up agency, because every time they don't, it gets awful. I think that's kind of one of the first sins of fundamentalistic culture, is that it disrespects human agency. And you know what? If someone's going to preach at me and tell me to give my life to God, I have to remind myself I can't give what I don't own. Like, I need to own myself if I can ever give something or sacrifice something or whatever.
At least you need to know yourself.
Yeah.
And right. I just want to throw out Parker Palmer. If anybody knows Parker Palmer, he wrote a book called To Know As We Are Known. And it's a beautiful book about the connection between head and heart. Because I think knowledge, when it's just head-based, which can be really enticing, especially in this time of transitioning from fundamentalist way of thinking, evangelical way of thinking, to a more progressive way of thinking. But that knowledge has to be integrated with heart and our emotions too. And so that's a great guide. Parker Palmer's To Know As We Are Known. And Howard Gardner is, Alan mentioned multiple intelligences. Howard Gardner is the father of that theory, multiple intelligence theory, and also a great resource for all kinds of stuff.
There's a notion from the yogic tradition that the farther one travels, the less one knows. And what the teaching is essentially is the further you leave yourself, the further you're looking for answers outside of self, the less one actually knows. And that's just so deep. You spend a lifetime working with that one, but it's good. It's very grounding.
All right. Any other thoughts or resources before we close out this conversation in anticipation for our conversation on community?
Yeah. There's two things on the blog, if you'd like to check it out, that have to do with this topic. One, addressing worthlessness, or concepts of worthlessness, if you'd like to read it, and the theological underpinnings of that, and how leaving that is extremely life-giving. And the other was kind of a little semi-mystical experience that I had floating on Valentine's Day, and learning to love the chaos in myself because as we talked about in our cosmological episode, there's this concept in the Hebrew Bible that God loves chaos. And so being able to love kind of my own chaos and disorderedness was a really cool experience. So those are up on the website, IRENCAST.com.
And as usual, we will put links to all those things that we mentioned in the show notes at IRENCAST.com/139. And there in the show notes, you'll be able to find all the relevant links and complete list of all the other ways to like, follow, and contact the show. But most importantly, you can add your particular voice to this conversation by commenting on there. And yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to this whole thing expanding. It's been a while since we've done a series. So this is the first series with the five of us. I'm excited. I'm getting nostalgic in the midst of it. Yeah, this is the first series we've all done together. So kudos to us. We are special, equally and unique.
Bonnie's more special than all of us.
Casey, you are.
Aw, let's just get into a fight on who's more awesome.
Let's talk about fusion.
On the other side of the music, we are going to be playing Desert Island. Should be fun. All right, so Desert Island. This is probably a game that I would assume is familiar for most people, and most people would, I think we've done it once before in the past. We did it, I think it was books. I think what 3 books would you take with you if you were stranded on a desert island? So this time we're going to theme it a little differently, and we're going to say, what 3 items would you bring on a desert island to maintain your to engage in creativity, right? The important part of self is expression, and the most beautiful form of expression is creative endeavors, whether it's art or pantomime or whatever people are into. So we're gonna go through that. And Raj, we're gonna start with you. What are the 3 things you would bring to engage creativity on a desert island? And we can be fantastical with this, right? So we don't have to be super technical about, well, that's 5 items, like crayons or whatever. Just saying to start off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in my imagination, I'm on a tropical deserted island. So there's stuff. What I would bring is a sizable, durable fishing net, a couple of pieces of flint to be able to start fires.
Are these your creative items?
Yeah. Hang on. We're getting there. And a couple of chickens. So have some eggs.
You're going the culinary route, I'm assuming.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to eat the chickens themselves. Well, maybe if they have plenty of babies, eat some. But essentially, on a tropical island, you don't need art supplies.
Oh my goodness!
Like all the stuff is there. What you need is some protein and sustenance.
Oh my god!
So Raj is like, I'm not going to play the game.
No. I am playing the game because you can create color palette out of plants and roots and fruits, and I love building forts. You can make twine and sticks. So you're on a deserted island. So part of what you want to do is keep the mind sharp, the body engaged. So you don't want a bunch of these prefabricated toys to play with.
Wow.
You want to be
let's just start out by devaluing everyone before they could even come up with their items.
No, I'm saying for myself.
Okay.
I didn't want to bring a bunch of prefabricated toys that would force.
So
me
basically,
into,
your answer is,
laziness.
I bring the island.
No, the island has. I'm on the island. I'm just saying I want to be able to be nourished in ways that because if you're scrounging for food, you're not going to be creative.
Okay, so if the island had indigenous chickens and you could make a net out of your twine that you've made from
indigenous fire.
Stuff. So what you're saying is you just wouldn't bring anything because you don't need anything.
Okay. So if we had that, the one thing that I would probably bring that's prefabbed is a decent acoustic piano.
Ooh.
See, that's the only thing you said that makes sense.
Right.
No.
We don't want any chickens or flint rocks or whatever.
Yeah, I like eggs. I like fish. There's going to be plenty of fruits. Have a bit of a balanced diet. I don't know. But yeah, the piano, maybe a drum. That'd be fun. But I could make a drum.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Well, I'm willing to go next.
Go for it, Casey.
So I'm going to bring comic books, a ukulele, and after listening to Raj talk about I can make paint from berries and such, which was genius, Raj, I've changed my last one to a telescope because I have really enjoyed connecting with the stars, and I think it'd be cool.
And there's probably no light pollution on a island.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Okay, I'm adding telescope to mine.
We're thinking on the same.
I'm adding telescope to mine.
And you don't need power for that.
That's right.
Right.
And also, it can double as like a survival device.
There's some telescope envy going on around here.
Oh, right. If you flip it backwards, can you start fires with it?
That's a good question. I don't
know. If anyone wants to know, I don't know how to play the ukulele, but I would have lots of time on an island to figure it out. So there you go.
There we go. All right.
Nice.
Bonnie, how about you?
I was trying to think, what would I really need? Like what could not get broken easily? What could I use for a long period of time in case I was stuck there for a really long time? And I came up with some very basic things that I think everyone should take with them if they're ever going to be deserted on an island. Crayons, paper, and pens. Those are my 3 things. Because you can draw pictures of the stars if you want to. You could write about your experience. You could write poems. You could keep a journal. And you'd have color. I mean, crayons are pretty important because you have to color your world, It can't just
like
be...
Like you color my world, Bonnie.
So, and if crayons break, they're easy to sharpen, or you could melt them if you wanted to do something creative with them.
Exercise your whimsy, Bonnie. The crayons are invincible, like they're infinite crayons. They never go dull.
Or you could use them for wax, right? If you could figure out how to make candles.
And my paper too. It's like a little stack, but it always somehow replenishes. So, yeah, that's what I would have.
There we go. I like that. Alan.
So this is going to sound unoriginal because my number one thing is telescope, but I would bring a Newtonian telescope. There's this guy in Australia who has been writing down and discovering supernovas as they explode, because you can see a supernova go off and you can see it for a short amount of time and then it's gone. And there's these explosions happening all over our galaxy. And they've computerized telescopes to pick them up whenever the supernovae go off. But this guy still beat all of the computerized telescopes with his own, on the ground, just a notebook, writing them down. So I think it'd be fun to look for explosions in the galaxy, while you're waiting. So telescope would definitely be number one. Secondly, I put journal, which Bonnie just said. And I think I would just get the biggest journal I could possibly get. I don't need crayons. Unfortunately, my world's black and white. And I think that for me and just my spirituality, journaling is just kind of the most important thing. As an Enneagram 2, I give a lot. And so journaling is really the only time I'm listening to myself and writing things down. And I'd kind of want to still do that even if I was alone. Because you'll always have someone to talk to, right? If you can learn to talk to yourself. And thirdly, I would have a shovel. Just because I'd like to build stuff. I think a shovel is probably the most important thing for me. I don't know. Build retaining walls. I was in construction for a while when I was younger. And I think I would just love to terraform an area of the island. Probably build some weird stuff.
Dig a tunnel.
I want to visit that island.
Dig a tunnel. Hey, that's... And then drown myself on accident because it's below the water.
Below the water.
I would build big monolithic structures and stuff, So if anybody ever got to me, they'd be a little weirded out.
With your shovel?
Yeah, with a shovel. That's all you really need.
You could just fashion a shovel from a tree. You got everything you need on the island.
On a deserted island, digging is kind of pointless, Alan. You'd want to build everything above the sand.
That's not... I'm imagining a mountainous island. I'm not imagining
God.
pit.
Do any of you watch Survivor? I watch Survivor.
Like for one season.
I'm a super fan of Survivor, so I feel like
I watched Gilligan's Island, dude.
That was my jam right there. That's my Survivor.
Yeah, that was awesome.
How about you, Jeff?
First thing, again, I'm gonna mine are bundles, so I'm just gonna say that up front. I'm gonna fully embrace the whimsy of this particular scenario, and
aka cheating.
That's right.
Right.
Well, at least it's better than boring.
Hey.
First thing is an iPhone. Not so I can call, because I recognize that I don't have service or anything like that, but I would like to make film. And I'm thinking the best device to do like film and editing is the iPhone that you have right there. So I could just watch my own movies.
For yourself.
practice my composition, play different characters, like engage in some sort of, so that's...
I could totally see you doing this, actually.
Dude, you do not need to be on a deserted island to do that. So, yeah, next week.
No. The second thing would be like I'm going with the Castaway scenario. So I got on that island because I was in a FedEx plane, and there are several boxes of I like precise, sharp colored pencils and coloring books. I've been doing a lot of coloring with my daughters lately. After Christmas, because we all got coloring books and our own coloring things. So I've been having fun doing that. So I would do some coloring just to relax. And then I would get one of those little kid sandcastle sets and really engage in building sandcastles with like those little cool buckets and shovels and just those are my 3 bundle items that would be available to me because I crashed on a FedEx plane.
Very cool.
Those are pretty cool.
I would totally want to be on that island. You were right.
All pretty cool.
I didn't even think of sandcastles. That's awesome.
Right. Like,
yeah, that's a good one.
When do you get a chance to do sandcastles? And I figure now you have all the time in the world. And I could build sets for my films within the sandcastles, right? Make my version of the Lego movie by doing little stop motion in the castles. And now I'm like, I want to go on a desert island.
And this
self-care,
iPhone
Jeff. It's self-care.
It's a magic iPhone that never runs out of battery.
That's right. Well, I'll be more practical. In the plane was an unlimited thing of like charging bricks that I could keep the iPhone charged with.
So what's the difference?
There you go. I know. What's the difference?
An unlimited supply of charging bricks.
Still need to keep within the narrative of the world, Man, that's a dream right there. Just endless time to experience creative endeavors.
That's the dream.
Now, to like have the endless time, just be creative and do the things you really want to do. Now I'm getting sad because that's not life. So let's end this conversation.
You can definitely set that up right now. Go to a monastery or something for like 2 days and just be with yourself.
Yeah, and not get paid and not take care of stuff that needs to get done. And yeah, that'd be perfect. Just abandon life. I mean, I wish I could, but not. That sounds bad. That's it. That'll do it for us this week. Alan, how can people find what you have going on the interwebs?
Just Facebook, and that's Rev Alan O'Brien, /Rev Alan O'Brien.
Bonnie?
Bonnie Lang Rambob on Facebook, and I'm also at Parkside Community Church in Sacramento.
And Casey?
Casey Tinnen on Facebook. The Queerly Faithful Pastor is my blog and also my Twitter handle, and loomisUCC.org.
And Raj?
On Twitter at Raj Rambob and Facebook /Rev Raj Rambob.
And you can follow me on all the socials at Jeff Manildi and listen on the 2nd and 4th Thursday of every month soon. We're still on hiatus, but my other Divine Cinema podcast at divinecinema.net. As for IRENCAST, don't forget to subscribe to the show and never miss an episode. We're available on all major podcasting platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. We just got on Radio Public for those of you that are into that. And while you're there, if your platform allows it, leave us a rating and or review. We're always looking for more and more ways to hear from you. And you can fill out our listener survey at irenicast.com/survey. The information you give us is super helpful as we move forward and continue to evolve the show. That's irenicast.com/survey. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
And this is Raj.
Thanks for joining the conversation.